This is TWiT.
You know, this has been going on since the Obama administration. I think it was 2012 or 2013 when the Commerce Department warned American companies about using equipment from Chinese companies, including Huawei, but also, as I remember, ZTE, which they've since basically put out of business with these kinds of accusations, and maybe Xiaomi. So as far back as 7 years, there have been people saying Huawei, we don't know who owns them. We know the guy who runs it is former Chinese military, former People's Liberation Army. Huawei says we're owned by our employees, our workers, but it's hard to prove that. And even if not, there's definitely the feeling that the Chinese government would have some sway on Huawei. So President Trump signed an executive order banning, which is kind of dramatic, Huawei gear. God, you know, I have to get the timeline right because this seems like ages ago, but this was May 15th.
Yeah, I was like, it was so recent.
1 week ago. I forgot that he declared a national emergency in this executive order and said the United States, companies in the U.S. cannot use telecom services that are solely owned, controlled, or directed by a foreign adversary. I'm not sure who defines foreign adversary, but that began the ban on Huawei gear.
Well, and somebody has been whispering in Trump's ear for a while about national security, 5G, and the telco networks. So I don't, this isn't like totally surprising. The timing was kind of like, what just happened? And as we can see from all the stories on the rundown, the fallout is tremendous.
The dominoes fell, including Google saying, Reuters said Google's going to, I never saw a confirmation from Google, but Reuters said Google was going to withdraw Huawei's Android license, which suspending business with Huawei. So without Android, Huawei phones will have to run some other, well, they can run Android, it's open source, but they can't run Google apps. So they don't have the Google version of Android.
And they're go ahead.
I was just, real quick, I was going to say when this news hit or was reported by Reuters, the first thing I did was go back to a website that my team worked on inside of Google. It's the Android Enterprise Recommended Devices list. There were about 240 Android devices on there, 24 of which at that time were Huawei. So I tweeted out, if this report pans out, or if you know, if you want to watch and see if it's going to pan out, watch this page. And sure enough, I went back today. Granted, we already know at this point that Google has said what it said, but all the Huawei devices are gone from that page. That's
confirming. They don't sell Huawei on the Google store. Microsoft pulled Huawei's laptops from the Microsoft store, but did not say anything about withdrawing the Windows license. That would be the kiss of death, I think, for Huawei laptops. ARM, according to the BBC, has told its staff to stop working with Huawei. Huawei's phones are running on ARM chips. Qualcomm says we won't sell you chips, so that means Huawei can neither buy chips from Qualcomm or make its own ARM chips. Or
that's probably the bigger roadblock here. Yeah, Stacey, I was going to say you're the chip girl, but in my mind, without having an ARM architecture license, they can't make those Kirin chips anymore.
They can't make, a lot of their chips. They're using ARM-based chips in their telco gear. They're using it in some of their server stuff. They're using it in their smartphones. I mean, that is kiss of death stuff. And to say, okay, we're not working with you anymore means to develop your own architecture for silicon it's a process. So their option would be to try to license MIPS.
MIPS is the last company left because Intel and Broadcom both followed suit.
Right. And so
and Xilinx, by the way. So it's really, they've been isolated. Then, by the way, the story's not over. Then, Huawei was granted a temporary reprieve. And Google will resume patches.
Okay, well, that's patching. So that's basically anyone, because if you have bought Huawei-based phones and they're Android-based Huawei phones, if Google doesn't support patching for them, you're like,
somebody told the government, if you cut all that off, that's bad for us.
Yeah. Don't you have a Huawei phone?
I had a P20. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to use it anymore. You know who has a Huawei phone and loves it is Paul Thurrott. I forgot to ask him about it because we were talking about this. I forgot to ask him what he plans to do with his Huawei phone. But the latest Huawei phones have Leica lenses. They have amazing cameras. They're really incredible phones, according to people who use them. I didn't like Huawei's flavor of Android. I can't remember the name of it, the Meow. I want to say the MUI. EMUI version of Android I did not like. But that was because I think mostly it was Chinese-centric. It really was. It was made for their market, not for our market.
See, this doesn't really hurt them in the U.S. because they don't really have business in the U.S. Obviously, it hurts them now globally.
They sell laptops here. They do sell a lot of laptops.
True,
here.
but I was going to say they also, under their Honor brand, sell some low and mid-range phones in the U.S. market, and a lot of people have those because you could get them unlocked on Amazon or direct from, I think it was consumer.huawei.com or something, and from the U.S. you could actually purchase them. So there's a crap ton of those Honor devices out there, which are a brand of Huawei. This also, not that it's a huge deal, but this also means we've gone from 2 foldables, down to 1, because now the Huawei Mate X.
They had
not happening.
A trifold.
Yep.
So the Department of Commerce yesterday announced a 90-day reprieve on an import ban against Huawei. It's the temporary general license on a limited basis. So partly that's to give telcos time to find alternative solutions. Partly it's to get updates for those Android devices.
I wonder if there was some sort of political thing happening here, because the declaration of a national emergency is weird. And for any country to ban something that is both embedded in the businesses of a lot of its own companies, this seems not well thought out.
What a shock.
I'm shocked.
I know,
yeah.
But it also seems like, it's basically like, go ahead and do this without thinking about the implications. So the fact that, a national emergency gives Trump powers to do this that he otherwise wouldn't have by going through Congress for trade agreements and that sort of thing. I'm not,
this feels a little xenophobic. It feels like a trade war, a shooting war has broken out over trade. Remember that Huawei's CFO, Meg Wanzhou, was arrested. She was arrested in Canada and is being held prior extradition to the U.S. because apparently she oversaw dummy corporations that Huawei used to sell against our sanctions to Iran. So that could be part of it. What has yet to happen, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, even though the U.S. Defense intelligence agencies have apparently briefed our allies and I don't know if they briefed Congress, but we have yet to see any evidence of Huawei spying, either industrial espionage or cyber warfare against the U.S. But that's the presumption, or maybe it's proactive in case they do, but there's no evidence they've done it. They've done some shady things.
We have been looking for evidence for 7 years or more.
Yeah.
They've
done some shady business things, but they've been business practices, not espionage.
So my guess is, in all that investigation, they've either done nothing and nothing was found, or they've done a heck of a lot that's going to scare the bejesus out of people, and they don't want to tell us.
You can think of reasons why they wouldn't tell us. Besides that, you could think maybe revealing what they know would reveal sources, which you, of course, in spycraft, you don't want people to know how we know what we know. So maybe the intelligence agents are saying, well, we know, but we can't tell you why or how. You would think Google, Qualcomm, Intel, Microsoft, one of these companies would at least say something like, we have it on good authority, or we've seen evidence of malfeasance by Huawei They haven't. They've actually said very little. Which makes me think they've been compelled to do this by some sort of national security letter type order that also orders secrecy, it's a gag order as well. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. I could see that happening because, yes, it's clearly disruptive to their businesses, not obviously as much as Huawei's, and they clearly are trying to, I mean, this is not something anyone wants to deal with. I mean, Huawei is not an insignificant supplier or participant in these markets. So
remember the last time this happened, it was ZTE, which essentially has been destroyed by this. $3 billion of market value was wiped out. I mean, and I liked ZTE phones, by the way. I was a real fan. They are the second largest telecom manufacturer in China, $17 billion in revenue in 2017. They were banned in the U.S. a year ago, May 2018, and pretty much tanked them.
And I'm curious what this means for like companies like Qualcomm have actually a lot of joint ventures in China because that's how you have to operate there. And I know Google doesn't, but Qualcomm does. I don't know about Broadcom, but so there are actually several very close-knit collaborations that companies have done in this space with China that I'm sure they're sitting there going, what do we do now? What does this mean?
Huawei itself is saying, they're very bullish. They're saying, we can handle this. We can make our own chips. We can make our own operating system. We've been planning this for months. We've been stockpiling parts from U.S. companies. We're not worried. We value our close relationships with our partners, they said, but recognize the pressure some of them are under as a result of politically motivated decisions. We're confident this regrettable situation can be resolved, and our priority remains to continue to deliver world-class technology and products to our customers around the world. I remember talking to Huawei's U.S. marketing representative at an event last Christmas. She was adamant that data did not get fed back from Huawei devices to China. She said, our data center for U.S. devices is in Germany.
But how do you prove a negative?
You can't prove a negative. That's right. Yeah. That's right.
I would so I would throw out a couple things. One, building an operating system takes time. I don't know how long they've been working on it, but they have been working on it for a while. Building a chip and designing a chip from scratch is a 2 to 3 year plus you've got the new chip problem process, right? Look at what Intel did with its designing modems, for example. They do have RISC-V is an option. That is a chip architecture that's open sourced. It's a RISC-based architecture, just like ARM. And so you could see them design under that a new chip, but you still wouldn't expect to see it, for 2 years at least, probably 3.
It's interesting because ARM is not a U.S. company. They
have a lot of
by a Japanese company, SoftBank. They're based. They were started in the UK. Its designs contain technology originated in the U.S. It was originally Apple was one of the big investors in ARM, but they sold their part a long time ago.
They have a lot of designers. A lot of design work happens here in the U.S. as well.
This is why this is so difficult. It isn't. There aren't these. There's not like everything in the U.S. The number one American-made car is a Honda. It's not. You can't. It isn't. These borders don't exist in many ways in business anymore.
There's no walls around the countries. Is that what you're trying to say?
You could build a wall.
Sorry,
it doesn't keep them out or in.
No, you're right. But here's a whole other thing, and not to get off the track of Google with this aspect. If this is a trade issue, and that's why we're being heavy-handed here, and we are being very heavy-handed. What about China? What does China do that says, hey, well, we manufacture all those iPhones
That's
here,
the scary thing. The last thing you want to see is a hot trade war, because we are, all of us, interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And anything unilateral from the U.S. could very easily be responded to by China in ways that would be scary for technology. And that's why this is really a story that resounds through all of technology.
Although China has been cool to our technology firms for a decade or more.
Yeah.
Which is why, everybody who goes over there does these weird joint ventures.
Yeah.
And
when you say cool, what do you mean?
They have laws in place to prevent U.S. companies from coming in and building, their own.
Yeah, you have to work with a Chinese company.
Right.
It has to be Foxconn building the iPhone, not Apple in China building the iPhone.
And they have enforced rules that have led U.S. companies to decide not to locate there or compromise in significant ways that, people at U.S. companies are not comfortable with. So there, is that cool to the tech companies, or just cool to our laissez-faire, free kind of democracy?
I would never, see. Well, okay. First of all, we have every right and a duty to protect ourselves. And if we feel like a Chinese company is going to harm us, we have the right to kick them out. I don't dispute that. I feel like they should at least give us some reason to believe that instead of just saying, trust us. And I am concerned about the reaction. And an escalating trade war is going to be problematic in a variety of ways.
Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for the chip issue at this point, when I heard about this on Friday, I'm like, they're just going to pull in Amazon. They're going to use AOSP, Android Open Source, and
they could probably do that today, right? They've got Chinese stores already because you can't. Google wasn't able to sell stuff into China, right? Google doesn't sell them the Google.
They don't sell the services, correct? Yeah. But because they were a licensee of Google Android, they couldn't create by definition AOSP devices to compete. Now they can. Now they can. But not if you don't have chips to run it. So that was, to me, that was the nail in the coffin right there. Because I figured, they'll be fine. It's just going to be like an Android Fire OS type experience. So,
but I remember reading that they use a lot of U.S. parts in their phones. Admittedly, there's a huge trade deficit. Most of the trade is going the wrong way. But they do buy U.S. parts and put them in their phones. They won't be able to get those anymore. Mm-hmm. I presume. China can manufacture most things. I imagine they could figure out a way around that. But you're right. Without ARM, the Kirin chips are ARM-based. The chips that they use, Huawei uses, are ARM-based.
They're good chips, too.
Are they?
Yeah. That's the shit. They're good. Ask Paul. The Kirin 980 and all the latest ones, fantastic. They're really done well. It's not just a straight, let's just use ARM's architecture and build a chip. They tweak things. They've got their own AI stuff. They got the DSP stuff. And they've done a fantastic job, especially in the imaging, the cameras. So,
yeah, they have an architecture license just like everybody else. So
I think the main thing to understand is it's not like there's a Chinese product and there's an American product. As somebody in the chat room just said, without Chinese parts, your F-150 is not getting out of the driveway. We are tightly interlinked at this point. We're tightly interdependent. I feel like if we're worried about espionage, if we're worried about cyber warfare, we need to address that directly. But I don't think saying, well, now we're going to draw a bright line and say these are U.S. products, these are Chinese products. I don't think you can do that anymore. I think that horse has left the barn years ago. Am I wrong?
No, but I don't know how well that our commander-in-chief maybe understands that. I'm also curious, why haven't we seen follow-up from our allies in Europe?
They're just as confused as we are, apparently. Some, like the closest allies, like Canada, say, okay, we'll take Huawei gear out of our 5G network. Okay. Some are saying, what are you talking about? Australia says, well, no. So that's the problem. I don't understand.
Well, Australia is right next door to China. If I were Australia, I'd be like, we'll get back to you on that, U.S.
You'd think if we had evidence of spying and wrongdoing here that would be shared with some of our exactly, and be shared with those allies. So I'm kind of like when Leo, you started talking about the lack of evidence. I've been shaking my head ever since this all started 6-7 years ago. I'm like, okay, let's see it. Where is it? I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but we need to know.
Actually, I take it back. Australia did throw Huawei out. In fact, some say it was Australia that led the war against Huawei. So I apologize. I got that wrong. Who is it that's still using Huawei gear? I mean,
AT&T.
It changed. Yeah, right. Not anymore. Not anymore, right? Not anymore.
I'm sure they're working hard on that.
5G.
It's not like, I mean, can you imagine if, you're telling AT&T to pull out, I don't know what % of their network gear is Huawei based, but it's not like they can just say, oh, as of Wednesday, we're shutting it all down. I mean, you'd have chaos because people's cellular connections would go down. Yeah. I mean, it's not.
Well, and then the other thing to remember is even though, we've given them 90 days, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the policy change because we seem to have kind of a zigzag foreign policy anyway. But the damage is done. It is now very clear that at the whim of the U.S. government, any company can be cut off. And maybe that makes you think, well, I'm going to make darn sure I'm not dependent on the U.S. government anymore.